Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network, and I am back for another interview with Dr. Ron Paul, almost 1 year after we spoke in 2025 at the beginning of the Trump administration. How are you doing, Dr. Paul, this morning?
Doing fine. Nice to be with you again.
Thank you for being with me, and thank you for all the work you continue to do. When I asked my audience again, when I let them know I was going to be talking to you and asked what questions they might like me to ask, overwhelmingly, everybody just wanted to say thank you for everything you've done and for the ways you've inspired them over the years. So just want to make sure to share that. Let's dive into it. I know we're short on time today, and we spoke, as I said, January 2025. Trump was just coming into office. I've been following your work at the Ron Paul Liberty Report with Daniel McAdams, and seeing your sentiments about the different policies and things Trump has done. What would you say is your current feeling 1 year into the Trump administration, 1 year after our first conversation?
I'd have to say that it's disappointment because we're always hopeful. We knew Donald Trump wasn't a dedicated libertarian. He didn't pretend to be, but he would say things that were very tolerable. He wanted to he wanted to stop wars. He didn't want to start any, and his program sounded decent, but I've been disappointed since then, especially the activity overseas with our military, the amount of spending that's going on, and I think a careless attitude about civil liberties. So it makes me disappointed on the way things have transformed. And I am hopeful that it won't continue because I think people are getting a little restless, and some of the Republican support that he's had may be leaving him.
I tend to agree. I know that we've got the midterms coming up later this year, and there's more and more people kind of worrying about the policies Trump has been doing. Particularly, I did want to get your opinion on ICE in just a moment, but a number of different policies, the Epstein debacle, and just different promises that were made and promises that were broken. But you mentioned the foreign policy, and this is one of the areas where I believe you've been the strongest for decades now, and you've been most correct calling out the ways that both parties don't follow the Constitution. They don't ask Congress for authorization to launch wars or to even launch limited actions, drone bombings and things of that sort. I'm curious, again, specifically with Trump, but maybe in the broader context, do you feel in 2026, like how relevant is the Constitution today? We try to make these arguments, I say libertarians and voluntarists and even conservatives, limited government conservatives who stick to the principles. We try to bring up the Constitution every time some president of either party bombs another country without authorization. And it almost seems to have no weight these days anymore. It seems like it's just kind of a forgotten relic, even more than it has been in the past. So, what are your thoughts on the relevancy of the Constitution, how we can fight to make it relevant again, and if you think Donald Trump, will ever be bound by it?
Well, I think things have changed tremendously because the people who defend and understand and want to use the Constitution aren't to be found very often in Washington. Matter of fact, if you take that position, you're considered to be an enemy. And if the Thomas Massey episode, I mean, here he is voting the most with the Constitution and common sense and fiscal responsibility, and the heat coming from the leadership of the Republican Party, it's just terrible. So I think that's a great disappointment that it happens this way. But when it happened, it has evolved. I think we're at the point that although we see a growth with individuals like yourself and others, hundreds of other people spreading the message, I think the message is alive and well and growing. But I think what's happened is the people who were willing to use lying and cheating and stealing and threatening of both parties have been able to take over the judicial system, the Congress, and whatever. I remember when we were working hard to try to keep from going to war in the Middle East, and they were going to make the major move, and I was on the Foreign Policy Committee, and everybody was for it, and I guess I was the only one against doing it. So I said, well, I introduced an amendment in committee that said you can't do it unless you have a declaration of war. And they got hysterical. They were so upset and so mad. And the chairman of the committee, who was a Republican, put me down. He says, that part of the Constitution is anachronistic. And I thought, it doesn't work anymore. And I believe he was reflecting the attitude. It was sort of old-fashioned. Things have changed. You're living in the past. And that's the way Congress works. But I think that we just have a big job waking up people. But as the failure of this current system goes, I think waking up people is going to be easier. And we have to remember, and I was drafted in a lot of different things during the Cold War, and yet, and there was always this threat of a nuclear exchange of weapons, and yet it just disappeared, the hardcore Soviet system. And it was because it failed. And I think and hope that the system that we have endorsed will do the same thing, because we are bankrupt morally and financially. So it needs to change, but we have to be alert to this. So you and I and anybody that cares, we have to do the best job we can to spread the message of liberty. So we replace it with this rather than those people now shouting fascism, socialism, and all the things, and they actually are promoting it. So I see the terribleness of the situation today as an opportunity for us to work harder to present our message.
I appreciate that, and I definitely agree that this is an opportunity. One of the comments you made there, about how we have the worst people who have gotten into the courts and the political machine, and whether that's lying, scheming, doing backroom deals. I'm curious, just from the philosophical perspective, obviously this is kind of part of libertarianism, but do you think that this is just the way humanity is going to unfold? Let's say that it does collapse as you just described, and we all do our best to insert libertarian values and voluntarist values into whatever comes next. Is it inevitable that the worst of humanity, the psychopaths, will try to seize the machinery of the state? And I mean, this is obviously why a lot of people have become anarchists, and largely due to you and your work. Some people go from libertarianism to voluntarism. But do you think that's just something we're going to always deal with? There will always be psychopaths, always unsavory types who try to get into government and use it for their own benefit?
I think it will always be there, but that doesn't mean that we can't make progress. And let's take Trump, for instance. He has emphasized, let's take education, for instance. He has talked about, and this doesn't mean that he will do it, but they want to say, well, look, and he uses the Constitution that the federal government shouldn't even really be involved in government schooling. And therefore, what we want to do is shift it all back to the states. Now, that could be very messy and just sort of pass the money on to the states and that sort of thing. But if they would deliver that back, and I see a shift there where people are really sick and tired of the school system, but you could apply that to medical care too. People are tired of it, and if there's another option, I think we have an opportunity. But I think the emphasis that return that to the states, so they still use that rhetoric in the administration. But the trouble is we don't know whether they live up to what they're talking about, because we have already been burned a bit by hoping and believing that we would have a different foreign policy. But quite frankly, I don't think our foreign policy has turned favorably at all.
I agree. Well, let's continue. I want to look at a couple more Trump's policies, and before asking you your thoughts on some of the issues of the day. One of the areas that I think is most troublesome for me, as somebody who does value civil liberties and freedom of speech, is the response, what I would consider an authoritarian response that Donald Trump has used via ICE. Obviously, I know that there's debate within libertarianism itself on what the correct libertarian position is on borders and how to handle that. We'll set that aside for the moment. But I do think that there is this sense of a rising, just like last time you told me, when Trump was elected, we were coming off the heels of the cultural Marxism and the progressive, movement under Biden, and Trump offered potentially a bit of hope to some people. And now it seems like we're seeing the counter to that, which in my view is a sort of nationalistic authoritarianism. Again, some of it relating to the border, but also Trump ignoring, basically saying he can ignore the courts, different socialist policies like buying stake in American companies. What are your general thoughts on that? I mean, I know you already said you're disappointed with Trump, but more specifically, do you see a streak of authoritarianism under Donald Trump, maybe almost the mirror image that we saw from the Biden administration, or how do you see that?
Well, I think at the beginning of Trump running, I think it was in 2016, I was asked by an interviewer on national television what I thought. He said, and it was a friendly interview. He said, "Why aren't you supporting him?" I said, and my simple answer was, I said, I think he's an authoritarian, and that says a whole lot. That means he, as an individual, should set up all the rules and laws rather than saying I've made a commitment to a moral principle of natural law and to follow our Constitution. So that's a lot different, and I think that is what has happened. And unfortunately, I think even though we had some good answers when he would talk about this, I think it's gone the wrong way, because I think the principle of protecting civil liberties is not going well. And this whole thing about what's happening with immigration, I think it is complex, and I think I don't think I've heard one simple answer that says this is the libertarian answer. You might find that easier in a gold and monetary policy, that you can't counterfeit money or something like that. But I think that the way this is going is that the people are going to continue to rebel against this, and we have to try to mold that into something that is much more positive, and that's a job and a half.
Definitely a job and a half. Well, let's speak to that libertarian position on borders and immigration. And so obviously there is, for me personally, first thing I'll say is I don't really like the term open borders or closed borders, because in my view, it still seems to imply the state in control of it, whether it's the state saying they're open or the state closed. So in my ideal, utopian situation, we have a voluntarist world where freedom of movement's not controlled by the state, and the only borders that really exist are our private property. And if I want to invite somebody from another country to come work for me, I have the freedom to do that. That's obviously not the world we're living in, but I think that's something that many libertarians fight for. But again, we've also seen some libertarians under Donald Trump basically say, well, we've been flooded with illegal immigrants, so we need to throw principles out the window, and we need to have a temporary sort of immigration police state, complete with facial recognition, surveillance, and ICE going around checking IDs, papers, please. Americans have been caught up in the mix of, some have been held for 48 to 72 hours, and some people are saying, well, it's no big deal. You get let go eventually. Don't make such a big deal. This is all to fix the immigration system. And as you said, it's a complex situation, but I don't see anybody proposing any kind of actual solutions to fix the current immigration system. For example, when Trump passed the big beautiful bill last summer, part of that included a cap on only 800 immigration judges. If he wanted to fix the immigration system, you would think maybe he want to have more immigration judges to expedite legal and illegal immigrants, but instead they focused on this situation with more ICE on the streets and everything that we've been seeing in the viral videos. Do you have a position, your own personal position, as somebody who has inspired many, many libertarians, on what the correct libertarian position should be on borders? I know that Murray Rothbard, even kind of later in his life, he wrote an essay called Nations by Consent, where he sort of argued that if one government can flood the country of another with immigrants, it can change the demographics, and that is almost a weapon, weaponized immigration. And so he started to believe that maybe libertarians should support strong borders. But what are your general thoughts on that, Dr. Paul?
Right now there's a big debate going on in Washington about whether or not if somebody is illegal and they're not a citizen, that they have a right to vote. I can't buy into that. I just think that's pure democracy gone wild, and it's more like the dictatorship of the majority. And I think the whole thing is that voting, if anybody can walk in and you can't identify them, and you're not allowed to identify them, they could vote 10 times in one day. And I keep to make fun of all this idea. I said, okay, you're going to allow people not to vote, whether they're a citizen or not. I said, well, what happens if they're allowed to vote absentee? And you don't have to come home very often. I mean, the whole thing is crazy. So I think this is a move. Some of this stuff is a move toward, too much democracy in the wrong way. That you just have to put a. That's what's happened here. We have all the special interest groups banding together. They get 51%, and they become the dictators, and they're able to violate all the liberties and the financial benefits of the 49%, and the wealthy get wealthier, and all of these things. So I think that is really the big problem. My personal position on one of my booklets on this, on Liberty Defined, I struggled with it. It wasn't easy because back then when I wrote that, it wasn't that bad. It's worse. I try to look at it as a private property issue. Well, you can't own a country, but you can own your house and you can own a guarded community. And if somebody knocks on your door, it said, well, I have a family and I need food and I need a bed, and we're coming in and we march in and the government says this is okay. Well, most Americans would say, that's crazy. Nobody's going to do that. They can't do that. So you get out of my house or get out of here. If you don't get out, I'm going to use violence. And so the private property is still recognized that you can't march in. And I think this is something. How can you translate that into a country? Well, in a way, you have to recognize that no, it isn't quite private property. But what if you're in a guarded community? You could keep people out of a gated community as well. But if you have people wanting to come into your country, I don't know how you could do it without some rules, because when I was running for the Libertarian presidential position back in 1988, this subject came up and it went back and forth. And I know then I was struggling. I said, because I was for as much immigration as possible and none of this stuff that goes on. I said, what? I said, but the question you have to answer is, when will the immigration, if you don't have some type of rules, when does that become an invasion? And some people would argue we have been invaded. And then my answer to that is no freebies, no welfare, and you have to have a sponsor or do something like that. But you can't just come in and not be responsible for oneself. And that is a problem. But I always argue on this issue: if you subsidize it, you'll get more of it. If you make it easy that you can allow anybody to walk in and get welfare checks and vote for more welfare and become a voter, it doesn't make any sense. So I would say that you can't have that much. And if you subsidize something, you're going to get more of it. And we subsidize a bad system of welcoming or limiting the number of people who come to this country and how they act.
Thank you for that, Dr. Paul. You mentioned the 1988 Libertarian presidential ticket that you ended up being on, and I was actually just reading about this yesterday. I didn't realize that the other Libertarian candidate was Russell Means, the American Indian activist. Do you remember anything about that? From what I was reading in the New York Times, it kind of got framed like you were the conservative candidate of the Libertarian Party and Russell Means was the more radical candidate. And this was when there was a lot of Native American activism going on. But do you remember much about that ticket or interacting with Russell Means?
Yeah, during the primary, even though I was a congressman, I had to campaign hard because Russell was doing well, and it was the whole idea of he as an Indian was running on a Libertarian ticket was, they thought this was good PR, but we never. We didn't spend much time, together arguing or debates or anything like that. But when I was running and doing well, in the Republican primary here, maybe it was an OA campaign, he sent me a message that he liked what I was doing and endorsed me and this sort of thing. So I think, I don't know what our differences were back then, but I think he was very libertarian, and we never had crosswords with each other. But it was something that I found very interesting, and I was always pleased that he sent me that message that he was encouraged by what I was doing.
Yeah, I found that to be a really interesting piece of libertarian history, especially for me as somebody who is part Native and really interested in the American Indian movement and the beginnings of the libertarian movement. But thank you for sharing that, Dr. Paul. I wanted to switch gears to another story here that is in the news right now, and that is Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, this is another area where Donald Trump has not kept his promises until he was pushed by, as you mentioned earlier, Thomas Massie, who is very much inspired by you and seems to be one of the only people who cares about the Constitution and tries to bring libertarian values to the political world. So the first thing I want to mention is that you were actually mentioned in the files a couple times, and you were probably the only person mentioned in the files that isn't mentioned in terms of being up to something no good. You were, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but Jeffrey Epstein actually mentioned you in an email, Dr. Paul. I'm going to show the email on the screen. This is him emailing a CBS affiliate called Dan Dubno, and he's kind of talking down about you. He's specifically talking about Iran, and he's talking about how many American politicians are supporting Israel. And he writes, quote, especially during an election year where everyone is falling over themselves to show who supports Israel the most, except for that dinkus, Ron Paul. So I'm just curious, how does it feel to be called the dinkus by Jeffrey Epstein? And I looked up the guy who was emailing, Dan Dubno. This guy is like a longtime CBS broadcaster, just a mainstream kind of journalist. I don't think he's somebody who is a friend to you either. But yeah, how does that feel to know that you're one of the few mentioned in the files, but not mentioned for anything nefarious or untoward? Just, I guess Jeffrey Epstein didn't like your principles.
Well, somebody mentioned it to me. I didn't happen to come across that and told me about it. And they said, well, you were in the Epstein file. And they said, but it was okay. It's okay because you were designated as the only person that came out looking better rather than worse, being in the Epstein file. But what astounds me is this is so symbolic of a nation that is morally bankrupt. I can understand, a little club going on and a little of this activity, but they've looked into this and they had millions and millions of pages of material, and then these emails that went back and forth by people who were supposed to be brilliant and they were smart enough to be billionaires, and they still act like they don't have a brain. So, but it also says to you, the volume there is just astounding, and you have to do a lot of sorting of that by a lot of people, and you have to be very political. Is how do you sort it out? How do you cancel it out and say, oh, we're for opening up the books? Well, those books aren't going to really ever be opened up, because all the time that it takes, it has to take the shuffling. Who's ever in power? Just the Democrats get in power and they eliminate their mess, and then the Republicans get in, and if there's any problem there, they eliminate it. But to me, it was just so huge and such a symbol of a way people live that is just astounding, and how the moral standards that existed. If somebody would have told me that before, it looks like the evidence is there that it did exist, but it's just hard for me to comprehend. But I probably would have never known. I probably would have never heard about this, my name being there, and would have been. It was a little bit of entertainment. If it was entertainment and people smiled about it, I guess I can't do much about that.
Okay, Dr. Paul, a couple more questions here. One more related to the Epstein files. What is your personal opinion, and why do you think Donald Trump fought so hard the release of this? I mean, is it just he's got some famous friends? Obviously, he had a decades-long relationship with Epstein. There's been no evidence showing him doing anything illegal or criminal. There's been accusations of all kinds of sort. But do you think it's just his own personal embarrassment or covering up for powerful friends? What are your opinions on why he resisted for so long?
Well, my first reaction is I don't care. Just stay away from me. If all this stuff going on, somebody else deal with it. I'd rather go back to and the Fed, something I can feel and touch and explain. But this is just so over the top. So I try to even avoid thinking about it, let alone pretending I have an opinion, other than the fact that I think it's a symbol of the moral bankruptcy of our nation.
Gotcha. Well, and so kind of on top of that, as I bring you here to our last question or so, one of the Epstein emails, Jeffrey Epstein says, I represent the Rothschilds, the Rothschild family. Now, obviously, people hearing that sets off all sorts of alarm bells. It seems like a lot of those theories that have been called conspiracy theories for years are starting to come true, or at least be revealed in one form or another. And the side effect for many of us is to feel, I don't want to say hopeless, but definitely to look at the political system and say, okay, well, if Jeffrey Epstein is friends with both parties and all these powerful people from kings and queens and royalty and politicians, celebrities are involved in these nasty, nefarious things, then how can we ever hope to reform or fix the system through voting and politics? And personally, I don't believe that that is possible. I believe in spreading the message of liberty, as you were discussing earlier. I advocate through that, through my journalism, through my activism, and any other way I can. But I don't believe that the answers are going to come through the political system. And so it seems like more and more people are coming to that realization, some feeling maybe more optimistic about it and saying, okay, well, now that we've let go of politics and lying politicians, we can focus on real answers. Others maybe coming away just feeling hopeless, like, apathetic. I guess we just got to throw our hands up and let the bad guys win. What sort of advice would you offer to those who are looking at things like the Jeffrey Epstein files, or just the ongoing and open corruption, the rise of authoritarianism from both parties as they pass the baton of tyranny back and forth? What kind of hope would you offer for those, especially those who have been inspired for you? What work should we be doing? What type of activism? Where should we be putting our energy?
Your energy should be dealing with oneself and how one lives and what believes, and be educated. And the responsibility is on ourselves. And I always believe strongly that lecturing or yelling or saying, do it this way, is ineffective compared to trying to set a standard. So I don't get involved in something that I have no control of, and people don't want to hear my opinion. But this can and I have been very impressed over the years with the dissolution, of the Soviet Empire, because we didn't have to have an exchange of nuclear weapons. I think that is the most fantastic thing that happened in my lifetime, that we were able to do that. And what happened? It was morally bankrupt. It was financially bankrupt. It just boom, it was over with. And I think some of this stuff is the same way, mainly because it's based on lies and cheating and fiat money, and people have too much trust in the money. But when they lose trust in the money, then you are going to see a collusion and a dissipation of all of this. So I see it as a malinvestment, the fiat money there, and the people who are shrewd and can buy the political influence, they can do it, and they become the trillionaires, and on and on. That's not to say anybody that made a lot of money is something bad about them, but I'll tell you what, if they have the opportunity, and the numbers of people are small, or the multi-billionaires and trillionaires, and that's a result of this Mickey Mouse type of money system. And people do things, they have too much money, they don't know what to do with it. But I think when the grand collision comes, where this whole thing comes down on us, as Mises predicts, the system, the bankruptcy is wiped out. But that means that the answer has to become with a moral revival, and that has to be individualized. And that's where I'm very optimistic, especially when not only in the moral issue of our fundamental beliefs, but also in the fundamental beliefs of free market economics and whatnot. Because I think that one thing I was encouraged about during my campaigns was the number of young people that came to the rallies, and they were in liberal universities, and they loved the story. Even though I told them, I said, why do you like this story, and why are you saying that you give us hope? And I said, I just spent 45 minutes telling you what the problems were. And they said, yeah, but you gave us an idea what we should do about it. And I think that's it. And that's where the responsibility will be to deal with these problems. But I think there's a financial element to it, that when you have all this money, it gravitates to a few people, they abuse it. So they have to go out and find people like Epstein and other things that are totally worthless. And but there's a limit to it. And the Soviet system collapsed without a nuclear war, so we don't need to fight them. So we could start by a moral and a foreign policy position of, why don't we just come home and bring our troops home and get to people thinking about voluntary arrangements between individuals, between economic activity, as well as countries. And I think most of these problems would just sort of fade away.
Thank you for that, Dr. Ron Paul. And I was one of those young people. I was 25 years old in 2010 when I saw you at U of H, and I supported you all the way through 2012. And I can definitely say I was in Tampa whenever I watched all the tomfoolery happening in the convention, when it sure felt like from the outside that they screwed you over and you didn't get the nomination. And that was where, for many of us, we believed, like, well, we're not going to win through the election, so let's just focus on spreading the message on the ground. Let's do podcasts, let's write books, let's organize events, let's do whatever we can. Let's be an example of the values of voluntarism. And so that's what I've been doing for the last decade since then, since losing faith in the system. And I continue to be inspired by you, Dr. Paul, and I know many, many people around the world are. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Everybody else, thank you for listening to Dr. Paul. Of course, continue to follow him at the Ron Paul Liberty Report. I will continue to share his work. We have to continue to spread the message of liberty despite how bad things may get, because it's only that message which has the chance of uniting people and getting us beyond the current broken system and towards the better world that we all know is possible. So till next time, everyone, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.
Thank you very much.
So there you have it, my friends. My second interview over the last 2 years with Dr. Ron Paul. We interviewed him at the beginning of the Trump administration, and he had a little bit more hope and optimism than he expressed today. I think after the first year of Trump, in my view, it should have been obvious to anybody and everybody prior to that. But I won't fault people for wanting to put a little bit of hope. Now it's clear as day, as Dr. Paul said, that Trump is an authoritarian. He's not a libertarian. He has nothing to offer those who are libertarians or freedom lovers, voluntarists, whatever labels you do or do not ascribe to yourself. But I really am just so grateful for Dr. Paul and his consistency over the years. I know there's a lot of people who have different conspiracy theories about him or feelings about him, and that's fine. All I know is he was somebody who inspired me early in my career, and somebody who really just continues to speak the same message. So we're grateful to him for that. And thank you guys for supporting me. If you want to see more interviews like this, subscribe. If you want to see more interviews like this, subscribe, follow, and like and share the Conscious Resistance Network. Visit us at theconsciousresistance.com, and we'll see you next time.
Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.